Hi, this is Mark. I just wanted to give you a heads up. We had a little audio issue with Nick's mic that we worked out about 15 or 20 minutes into the show. So please bear with us. And the proper mic volume kicks in about 15 or 20 minutes in. Thanks a lot. Welcome to State of Ed, a podcast about education inside the classroom and out. My name is Mark Isix.
And I'm Nick Simone.
How are you, Nick?
I'm doing well. Yourself?
I'm doing very well. I know we're trying to get one of these out a week, but life is getting in the way. I think we both have a full-time job that might have something to do with it. I also wanted to say that we are celebrating our 100th download. So I have to thank your aunt for listening to each episode 33 and a third times. So thank you very much. We're not quite at Gangnam Style levels of following, but we're getting there.
Well, hopefully it'll continue to progress nicely, the numbers.
Before we jump into our topics, I just wanted to share with you, I don't know if you caught it, John Oliver, after we did our last podcast, I guess he was so inspired by us that he did a whole piece on testing. I don't know if you happened to catch it on his show on
I,
HBO.
I did. I thought it was brilliant, as everything he does on his show, but really his attack on standardized testing and the impact that Pearson is having, or the influence, I should say, that Pearson is having, was just remarkable. Several of my students even commented on it as well.
That's great. Well, I know your students really follow a lot of those shows, and that's really amazing. They're very politically conscious, which is very cool.
Absolutely.
But I know you wanted to talk about AP. You're an advanced placement teacher. You have been for a very long time. I know you do a lot of the grading. They fly you to all kinds of really wonderful parts of the country where you could watch the grass grow almost all day long. So it's pretty amazing. But so AP is a big part of your daily routine. It's a big part of your career. And I know you wanted to talk a little bit about AP and the crunch that a lot of the kids have been experiencing the last week and a half, and it's continuing throughout this week.
Yeah, well, I think it's obviously very timely, these 2 weeks with the advanced placement test being given. And I just look at my career when I started in 1994. The first AP class that I taught was a European history class, and we had 25 kids in the class. And my previous chairperson was incredibly restrictive on who would be able to be in the class. And this past Friday, with my AP United States history class, 105 kids sat. And
Wow.
we should point out that the school hasn't gotten any bigger. As a matter of fact, I think our class sizes have gotten smaller each graduating class. So you can imagine, we've improved the numbers tremendously, and I think that's a trend all throughout the country. And I think with all of this talk about raising standards, I wish more of the educational leaders would understand that there's a way to do that. With us in New York State, we talk about the Regents exam. Now, I don't know what your view is on this, but whenever I start to prepare for the Regents, I always begin by showing the kids the Regents that I took in high school. I graduated in 1990, and then I show them the ones from today, and they are utterly shocked at the different level of the questioning on the exam. I mean,
You don't tell them that you walked uphill both ways in the snow to take the Regents, do you? Okay.
Thank you for that one. But they're amazed at how much more challenging the Regents was. So I guess my point is, we talk about raising standards. I think the best way to raise standards is to get more students to take the most challenging courses.
Well, if you think that test that you took is difficult, a colleague of mine a few years ago, back when I was the chairperson of the social studies department, she gave me a copy of the eighth grade assessment, the state assessment from, I guess, when she took it, which was probably back in the 60s. And that thing was probably equivalent to the AP test that your kids just took
Oh,
the
I'm
other day.
sure. One of my students once found, we just keep going back, an eighth grade social studies test from Kansas in the 1870s that would blow your mind.
Was
Want
the
to
essay on John Brown?
nice. Um, but I just think that we really should consider the changes that have taken place in advanced placement as a tremendously positive trend in education. I mean, if you look in 19, I looked up some of the numbers, and in 1998, there were approximately 635,000 students sitting for an AP exam. And 10 years later, in 2008, that number has gone up to almost 1.6 million.
Wow.
In terms of the number of tests, that number has increased by about a million tests in 1998 to close to, it's about 2.7 million in 2008. Now, I understand a cynic might say, well, this is the College Board trying to get more money from the students.
Sure.
But I don't look at it that way. I think the way the College Board is run, I mean, I've watched them for 20 years. They run this very well. They prepare teachers incredibly well for changes to the exams. They are, really still trying to push colleges to provide credit. I don't know how familiar our listeners are, but these exams are based on a 1 through 5 scoring scale, and depending on the test and the college, the students can get college credit for this. I could just speak, of course, for my students. We have so many students who are graduating a year early, a year and a half early, taking a semester abroad. So I always tell the kids, this is the one exam you're going to take, I feel like, in your high school career that actually has a quantifiable, tangible benefit to you. Uh, and
That's right.
it's very challenging. I mean, when you have 36 different AP courses that are offered by the College Board, it really is a remarkable program. But of course, then the question is, but how much is too much, and what is manageable for all the students?
So you bring up a lot of good points, and I guess I want to try to dissect them one at a time. So if the number of tests is going up by a million or more, then what could we attribute this increase to?
Uh,
Beside the College Board, making money, which let's not be too pie in the sky or Pollyannish about it, but that is a factor. I mean, they are a business. Let's not lose sight of that completely.
I think I really think that schools are slowly starting to realize the best way to prepare kids for college is to put them in a college environment. I mean, if you look at the history of the AP program, this started in the 1950s with elite prep schools combining with Harvard, Princeton, and Yale, and saying our students, now the 1950s, and our students are not prepared to handle the rigorous demands of our most prestigious colleges. So can
No,
you?
our students were not prepared to face the Russians in the Cold War. That's part of I'm sure, the origin of this.
A lot of history references from you today.
Yeah, I know,
You are
and
desperate to get back. Oh, you just did review. That's right. So you are
that's right.
desperate to get back in the classroom.
Yeah, but I did global history review, not U.S.,
Oh,
so I
okay.
have to
Uh,
dust
so,
off my U.S. memory.
well, if you look at that, back in the 1950s, there was a demand to prepare kids for college more. Now, think about the Common Core and all of the complaints today. Colleges are saying the same thing. They want more kids to be prepared. It began as a very elitist program. It has now evolved into getting as many kids as possible walking into freshman year prepared for that work. There are teachers all over this country that'll tell you they're concerned that too many of their kids are not ready for college level work. And again, I don't think that getting everybody, Common Core, I don't think that everybody taking the same test works. But more kids to take the most rigorous tests, I think, will be more effective.
Okay, so let me play the cynic, and you probably can already guess where I'm going with this. But now I'm that teacher who says, well, you're diluting my class. When I had 25, everybody was truly working on an AP level. But now that I have 105 like you have, I have to water it down because clearly they all can't be that top echelon kid. So what's the response to that?
It takes a different. You have to think of it differently. It's a great point, and you're right. A lot of teachers will feel that way, but you have to look at it as every student who walks into your class is not going to get a 5 on the exam. Uh, Somebody once told me that you don't want the kids to walk into your class as AP students. You'd like them to walk out of your class as AP students.
That's a brilliant, brilliant line. I can only imagine had the ingenuity to say that to you.
Well, I will tell my the audience it was you who told me that. And I've used that line for so many of my colleagues because there's this thinking that everybody's got to walk in there already prepared to handle the most rigorous of courses.
Right.
I don't think you have to dilute the program. I mean, it would be unfair for me to say that I haven't changed the way I approach my class when I have four sections, as opposed to that very elitist first class I taught. But it doesn't mean that it has to be watered down, that the kids aren't still challenged. And I think that's where differentiated instruction also comes into play. There's no question that with some students I can do different activities and challenge them outside of the class that other
Right.
kids might not be able to handle. I'm always putting articles on my website for kids to read. Like even as an example, this year there was a kid made a reference to Grover Norquist early in the year.
Hmm.
Now, the tax, for those people that don't
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
the man who
The pledge, yeah.
had the pledge uh, to have all congressmen not support tax cuts. Now, I was overwhelmed that the kid knew who Grover
Tax
Norquist was.
increases.
Tax increases, I'm sorry. So I was overwhelmed by the kid knowing Grover Norquist, and nobody else in the class had any clue who it was.
Right.
So some kids were interested, and I put articles related to Grover Norquist and his role, and some kids read them. Other kids didn't. So
Right.
you're still challenging kids in a certain way, without, I feel, having to water it down.
You speak to the pressure that kids are under, and you speak to students and challenging them up. And I had a student who was prepared for the AP Euro test, and I bumped into him in the hallway right before he was about to go into the test. This is just a day or two ago, and he was very, very nervous and worried that he wasn't going to do well on the test. And I think this sort of speaks to what you were saying before, and the attitude that we have to take in schools. And I said to him, well, I asked him, I said, "Have you had a great time this year?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Did you learn a lot this year?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Did you learn more than you ever would have learned had you not taken this class?" He said, "Yes." So I said, "Okay, good. So the class was a success. Now go up there and do the best you can, and whatever happens, happens. And as soon as it's over, then it's over. And you've done all the preparation, you've gone to all the review classes, you've worked your tail off, you've worked harder than you ever knew that you could work or thought you could work, and you've expanded and grown as a student and as a person. Congratulations, you did it. And then whatever happens with the test and whatever number comes up is the number that comes up. Obviously, I hope you get a 5, and if you don't, then you've already won."
Well, that's a great approach and great advice to give the young man, because the victory is from September to May. The test is one
Correct.
day in time. We tell the kids this
Correct.
all the time. But that does bring up a very good point. Administrators, of
I
which
knew you
you
were
are,
going to go there.
yeah, administrators have to be able to fairly evaluate a teacher based on AP grades. Now, I bring that up because you can very easily manipulate how well your grades are by only allowing kids to take the test who you are confident are going to do well. If you keep a smaller sample size, then clearly you can get what teachers refer to and administrators refer to as a passing rate. But there is no such thing as a passing rate based on the College Board.
I know
They
that's a big bugaboo for you. You go crazy when you hear people toss around the passing word when it comes to AP.
Well, because it doesn't exist. The way they use the 5 point scale, the five is extremely qualified, the four is very qualified, three is qualified, and a two, which administrators and teachers have come to consider failing, is just considered less qualified.
Not
And,
all administrators,
no, I
please.
understand that, of course.
Thank
But
you.
but you hear, I go to conferences all the time, and you hear, I presented at many conferences as you have, and you hear teachers lament the fact that their administrators put an awful lot of pressure on them. Now,
Right.
that's not to say that you can't have a conversation with your teacher and evaluate AP statistics,
Hmm.
but I do get very frustrated when people try to compare, even comparing cross disciplines. You can't compare the calculus statistics, which is a fraction of the number of kids who are taking that, to the English language exam, which is probably, I mean, I don't have the numbers in front of me, it's probably 4 or 5 times the number. And for example, I know that calculus, 25% of the kids nationwide get a 5. Whereas on the English language exam, some years it's as little as 7% of the kids taking to get a
Right.
5. So you have to know how to evaluate these statistics.
Well,
But
because it's easier to motivate and sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of push up a student into an AP English class than it is to an AP Calculus class because
absolutely.
you either possess a really strong foundation in math or you don't. And if you don't, AP Calculus is not a place for you to try to spread your wings.
Absolutely. And I just, I get frustrated by it, but I also will tell you, look, I've been teaching a long time and I've had kids get ones throughout my career. I do not consider all of those ones failures. I think many of those kids benefited greatly from being in the class. Would I prefer that they didn't get ones? Of course, but I'm not going to say that they shouldn't have been in the class. Being
Right.
around kids that got fives was an experience that's going to benefit them for the future. And there are so many kids who they never would have been in the class under the previous, guidelines, who did get threes, fours, and fives. I mean, it's so frightening for me to think that there are students who never would have been given an opportunity and didn't just sit in the class, did well in the
Right.
class because of it.
But there are different kinds of ones, just like there are
Sure,
different kinds of 80s. There's the
sure,
one with the kid who really busted his hump and he was kind of working his tail off from the very beginning. And the one was, for better or for worse, the best he could do in that circumstance. And then there's the one that the student who should have gotten a 5 gets a 1 because he's lazy, because he doesn't do what he's supposed to do, he doesn't prepare. That's a sin. Just like the 80, you have a student who gets an 80, that could be an absolute wonderful grade. And then you have the student who should have gotten a 95 but got an 80 because he didn't hand in homework or he didn't study for a test or he's
right,
been cutting class and so on. So I feel like you just can't look at that one on a piece of paper without knowing the kid, without knowing the
of
situation,
course.
and that really shapes how you interpret the numbers and the data.
And that's how you evaluate, by having a meeting with the teacher to have that discussion, because nobody knows the student better than the teacher. And even kids who don't do well, I look at it as it can be a wake up call to them. It explains to them, or it shows them that if they want to do well in college, they are going to have to work differently. They are going to have to put in a greater effort. That it's not going to come easily. We have so many kids, unfortunately, that can do well without studying on watered down tests. The regents, which has become
Right.
unfortunately too watered down over the last few years, we
Hmm.
have kids that are getting master in that who haven't studied once. That's not a good message to send kids if they're planning on going to college.
Well, of course, and the habit of mind that is developed for that student is I can go ahead and take tests on any level and still do fine with
Right,
putting in a minimal effort, and that's just not a sign of things to come in life. You just can't succeed without being willing to put in as much, if not more, than the person that you're sort of in competition with.
right. But now, while we talked about the difficulty in explaining to everybody that we've expanded AP, getting teachers to understand that, I think a next interesting question is, well, how many AP classes should these students be taking? What might be considered too much? Because these kids are very motivated by what they think colleges want to see. And we have a lot of kids who are they're graduating with over 10 AP classes.
So, what is your take on that? How many is too many in your opinion?
Well, I obviously every student is different, and I always encourage the kids to take as many as they can, but they have to be able to handle it. And it depends on, are they working? Do they have jobs? How involved are they with athletics, which we know, or dance, which takes up an awful lot of time? And what is their capability? I mean, I would like kids to be as successful as possible. I really can't give you a number. I'm proud of what we've done where we work, of expanding the number of AP classes that are available. Um, and I think a lot of schools probably feel that way. But I don't know if some kids maybe might be pushing themselves a little bit too much. I don't want kids to be, you know, having breakdowns during this week either.
Right.
And there is another issue. I don't know if this has come up in your school that I really wish the College Board would address. We have so many kids who are taking the SATs in May, and that's 1 week before the AP exams. Now, we've had more and more kids that have moved their SAT day to March or to June. But that May testing day, it's an awful lot for them.
Yeah, I wonder why they do that. I mean, you'd have to think that one side knows what the other side is doing, or
Yeah.
they're different halves of the same whole.
Right. And of course, as much as I praise the AP test and what it does for kids, we know that the SATs are important. We may not agree with what they assess. We can talk about that at a later time. But these kids know that they need to have good SAT scores to get into the colleges they want to be accepted to. So the timing is definitely a factor.
Well, listen, I think that like you, it really depends on the student. And we have some students that if we can get them to build up to take one AP class by the time they're seniors, then that's a huge victory. And we have
Right.
other kids who are just they're taking AP from ninth grade on, and they are wonderful, and they can handle more and more and more, and there's just no reason to let them take the foot off the gas. Again, as long as they're emotionally stable and
Right.
okay through the whole process, because especially around this time, you can see the wear, the physical wear on kids, and they're not getting a lot of sleep, and they're going from review class to review class, which sometimes they go till 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night,
Right.
and then they first go home and do their other work, or they're first going to their job, or they're first taking care of a sibling. So everything has to be with within reason with what a student can handle, but at the same time we want them to expand and try to push the limits of what they can handle, because that's the only way that they grow.
Yeah, well, and also what has happened recently is some of the newspapers, Washington Post being one of them, have been rating high schools using AP and IB tests. Now, again, I don't know how familiar our audience is, but people love school ratings, and
That's right.
I always laugh. I mean, my mom will always ask me, where did your school get ranked? I said, but these numbers they can be easily manipulated. So the latest one that the Washington Post has been using, and I've told my students this because our school did pretty well, but they would base the number of tests that were taken by the senior class. So the number of AP test or IB tests that have been taken by the senior class divided by the number of seniors in the
Hmm.
class. Now, there's no question what they're trying to encourage is more students to take the exam.
Right, but you know as well as I do that there are schools that are manipulating the numbers
There
so
you
they
go.
can improve their ranking.
There you go. I mean, and then they can tell the realtors, look, my school is number 7 in New York State. Our school is number 2, and
That's
that.
right.
So I would prefer. This is what I've told my students. I would prefer that we take the number of grades, number of tests that were either scored a 5 or a 4 and a 5 or a 3 and 4 and a 5 divided by the number of seniors. Because that way you can't manipulate the number of kids taking the test to make it smaller. So it's
Hmm.
based on both achievement and
And pure
access.
numbers.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And to me, that would just be a better way of evaluating a school if this is what you'd like to use as your criteria.
So then why don't they do it?
I because I haven't taken the time to just write to somebody. I really feel it would be such a great change because you would really, I have no idea what that would do to our schools, but I know that we don't manipulate these numbers. We do everything we can to encourage as many students to take AP, but we don't just open the floodgates. And there are
Well,
schools that clearly do that.
speaking of manipulating numbers, you set up a perfect segue for us. I wanted to talk about Atlanta and what the heck's been going on over there in the last couple of months. Actually, the last few years, but the trial and the sentencing just ended. But for those who are unaware, I mean, there was a huge cheating scandal that went on for a significant period of time in the Atlanta school system. And it impacted thousands of students who allegedly had their not allegedly, I think it's pretty much determined at this point that they had their incorrect answers changed to correct answers, most notably on a 2009 exam. And basically it was the miracle in Atlanta educationally, and there was a woman who was running the whole system, the superintendent Beverly Hall, who basically, it was determined, created this culture of cheating and a systemic cheating that pervaded throughout the system. And she passed away before the sentencing could be completed. but teachers went to jail for this, and that's how how crazy this whole thing was. I mean, they were trying them for things that like mobsters get tried for in terms of manipulating systems and corruption, and it was all kinds of crazy stuff. And I just want to get your take on it. And there was also a to me, this is sort of a reflection of merit pay and why merit pay doesn't work. And merit pay, in my opinion, doesn't necessarily have to mean the individual teacher, although by definition, I'm sure that's what merit pay technically means. But any system or anything that's put in place where a school or an individual teacher will benefit monetarily for success, academic success, is a form of merit pay for me, in my purview.
Right.
And that's why, to me, Race to the Top is a form of merit pay, because it does what what that would do to an individual, except it does it to an entire school or entire school district or an entire state, for that matter.
Right. Well, I'll answer you this way. First of all, it's yet another reason why the advanced placement program and the College Board is a far superior way for us to challenge kids. The security that is involved in the AP test, we're never allowed in the exam room.
That's right.
These kids are sealing every section of the test after they're done with it. They can't tell us anything that's on. They sign their name that they will not, say anything about this exam. Only certain parts of the exam are released. The exam is graded at a separate location. There's different. The U.S. exam is graded in Louisville. One of my colleagues goes to Utah. There's one in Daytona. The security is so incredibly intense for the grading of these exams. And now you look at what you brought up with Atlanta, where teachers might be proctoring their own student tests. And I believe some of the things I read was just as simple as erasing the question. It's not sometimes people think it was giving the kids answers. The kids were completely unaware of this.
That's right.
Collecting the test, you erase 5 answers, you put the correct answer, and the kid gets a higher score.
They had cheating parties, essentially, where
Right.
they got together in rooms and they did this. And if you read Freakonomics, I'm pretty sure you did.
Yep.
They do a whole segment of this. Put a link to it on the show notes, but they were able to run all of these tests and find out, and this is almost comical, that the teachers who changed the answers actually had a wrong answer in one of the sequence of answers that they changed, if you remember that part of the book.
Oh, absolutely. So, but it's, think about it, how pervasive this must be, where we're not even aware. Because this is just one example that was brought to, tremendous attention recently. But it's very different. When teachers are going to proctor their own exams, you have to have, obviously, you have to have from the top down, like the security measures have to be put in place. And I don't even know if we have the manpower for that.
It's not. I was going to say that, but in addition, it's not cost effective, or it's cost prohibitive, I should say, to do that on all state exams. Kids are paying $90 or $100 per AP test, so that gives them capital to have the kind of security system that you're talking about in place. And we lock down and basically hermetically seal a section of the building for them to work,
Right.
where they're not going to be impacted by anything other than, God forbid, like a fire alarm. So I don't know if you could theoretically or feasibly rather do that, because of the amount of money that it would cost per exam in order to pull that off. Not
Right.
to mention space and logistical issues.
Yeah, and again, I should point out, we hire people to come in for the 2 weeks to administer these exams.
That's right.
Teachers are not involved in this process at all. It's troubling. Although I will say, as much as I find what the teachers did reprehensible, did you happen to see the Daily Show episode where John
Fraud
Stewart,
City?
Yeah,
Yeah, I'll put a link on that as well.
I mean, you compare the punishment that the teachers faced to the punishment of the people on Wall Street who caused the 2007 recession. I wouldn't exactly say it's equitable.
It's close. But no, just looking at some of the numbers, for example, principals were doing this to earn $5,000 bonuses, and district administrators for $20,000 bonuses. And not that that's a pittance, but Holy cow! I mean, when you compare it to the money that that investment bankers and credit default swap uh, creators were making, I mean, it's ridiculous. And the other thing is to look that they're going to jail for all these years for what is such a small amount of money. But it also, this is why merit pay doesn't work in my estimation, because a $5,000 bonus is enough in some cases to corrupt the principal of a building because the salaries are so low, or what have you. That's terrible. So whenever you have any kind of system where if you win, you benefit financially or economically. Now that's wonderful in a private sector. That's how that it's driven by that. And that's the profit motive. And that is the engine that drives capitalism. That's wonderful for that.
Right.
But schools are different,
I will
for
give you.
better or for worse.
I'm sorry. I
Yeah.
will. I will give you the reason why I always tell people that merit pay doesn't work, and I think it's very, very simple. And to me, you can't. It's indisputable. If you're going to base merit pay on students performing on tests, there are teachers all throughout my building, me included, who are helping other students to do well on exams. I often tell kids, you don't have to go to your teacher for extra help. We're constantly helping each other.
Right.
So what?
Not to mention the collaboration that occurs during
Right.
prep times and giving people ideas and lessons and so on.
Right. By definition, merit pay, I'm assuming, is limited to a certain number of people, which means teachers are now going to have to compete with each other for that money. Well, what
Right.
incentive do I have to help another student from another class who will then benefit from the merit pay? Now, of course, for me personally, I would do it, but the reality is that you're creating a competitive environment with teachers, which you don't want to do. You want teachers to constantly be helping each other and
Correct.
help all students.
You want a collaborative environment, not a
Right,
competitive
and
environment.
it makes no sense.
So in this article that I was reading up on the Atlanta situation, I came across the so-called Texas Miracle, which you might remember way back from I guess it was in the 90s or early 2000s when Rod Page was the superintendent of Houston schools, and they went from 26% of the city's 10th graders passing the state math test to 99%. I mean, that's like Saddam Hussein used to get 99% of the popular vote in Iraq. That's because the ballot said Saddam Hussein, yes or no, and I think that's a true story.
Yeah.
But so then, of course, what happens to Rod Page when the passing rate goes from 26 to 99%? He becomes the United States Secretary of Education.
Right. Incredible.
And that's how that works. It's an unbelievable thing.
Yeah. And for non-educators, I do understand there might be a frustration that why can't we do these things that work outside of education? But hopefully we're going to continue to explain that that you can't compare. You can't compare the business world to education. There's just nothing like it. So
There is nothing like it. But I wanted to change gears for a second and talk a little bit about homework, because we just came out of the AP, or we're coming out of the AP testing period, and homework it becomes a touchy subject right now in the buildings, but for other reasons. But I do want to talk about homework in general. But of course, people giving a lot of homework during AP time is not a way to engender love among your colleagues. But what are your thoughts about homework? How much is enough, and how much is too much?
well, do you remember a couple of years ago they had that homework headline in Time Magazine, I think, or Newsweek, that said, are we giving our kids too much homework? My feelings on homework, and of course this is very general, is first of all, homework should be given when it is meaningful and when it is necessary. I don't believe, and I also think, especially in the upper grades, you really need to give kids more than a night to complete homework assignments. We can't ask kids who are so incredibly involved in activities and with multiple classes to have a homework assignment due night after night after night. I think you have to give them 2, 3, 4, 5 days, sometimes even a week to complete them. That's what we do in college. I don't think there's very few college classes, I think, meet every single day with a reading due every single day. So that's my first philosophy. My second philosophy, not I'm not an elementary teacher, but I am a little concerned that maybe in the early years that they actually are getting too much homework. Because I think what happens is the kids who do well, they'll just continue to be stressed, but they'll do the work. The kids who struggle, it's almost like they close out and they shut
Right.
down and they shut down.
Hmm.
And then we have students who just will never complete homework assignments. But I'll also add that if you are going to give homework assignments, there has to be a consequence to it. And what I mean by that is it has to count for something. Homework can't, it has to contribute either to preparing for an exam or it has to count as a significant grade. You can't give homework 4 or 5 nights a week and then count it for 5% of their overall grade for the marking
Right.
period.
Right.
Because
It's out of balance.
because the students are savvy enough to know, well, why do I need to do this if it only counts for 5% of the class?
So I'm also a fan of differentiating homework because, I could have a delicious steak, but if I have that steak every night for dinner, after a while, I'm going to be, steak again, really?
Right.
You just need you need to flex a different muscle. You need to do something different. So when a teacher assigns read pages 11 through 13 and answer questions 1, 2, and 3 on page 13, and that kind of assignment is every single night, or every single assignment, regardless of when it's given. After a while, students will do that, but they're just not going to be enthusiastic about doing that assignment. And then the teacher will wonder, well, why are they not interested in doing my homework, or why are they not doing my homework? They're lazy, they're this, they're that, and the other thing. Part of it is you have to give them a reason to want to kind of tune back in to your homework and give it a shot. And you can't do that if you're giving them the same type of questioning and same type of assignment every single time.
Right. And of course, that does apply differently to different subjects. I do think that in math, obviously, practicing questions is important, especially for the kids that are struggling and need the extra time to do that. I always
Yeah,
get
but you can still differentiate math
oh,
assignments as well.
absolutely. I'm not saying you can't. I'm not saying you can't, but I just think it's not maybe as easy or as you can't do it as often. Would be my point. I mean,
Yeah,
we can disagree.
yeah. I mean, there might be a little less flexibility with math than other subjects, but I still think that there's plenty that you can do, and it doesn't only have to be the differentiation doesn't only have to be in the topic that you're doing. You could cycle homework and bring back older topics, and you could also bring in some spatial relations questions, and you could bring in some logic questions and things that just flex the math muscles in the mind without being quote unquote math questions or
Right.
equations.
Yeah. I mean, I always get a kick with my class on a Friday. I'll say to them, all right, your homework, and these are for the younger kids, and they all start groaning, oh, homework on Friday. And I'll say to them, well, your homework, we just finished learning about the Vietnam War. So your homework is to find a family member who was around during the Vietnam War and talk to them about their feelings. And they get caught off guard, but I actually mean it. That's something I'd like them to do for homework.
Right, and they'll go deeper in trying to complete that homework assignment than they would if they read pages 11 through 13 and answered questions 1, 2, and 3 on page 13. Not that you can't ask that of them, but you have to mix it up. You have to have different types of assignments. When I was teaching history, one night it would be create a dialogue between Gandhi and Ataturk, or it would be comparing and contrasting two things, or draw a political cartoon, or create an anagram, or do different kinds of things to demonstrate an understanding of something. It didn't only have to be in answering questions, on a particular page.
Yeah, and this is an interesting topic because we also don't want to come across as the Americans who are lazy and the other countries that are giving their kids far more homework. But I do think there has to be a balance.
Right.
I really do, because I think we have to just count the hours in the day and count up what these kids are doing outside of school. They're in school for 7 hours. They're in a club sport for 2 or 3 hours. They have, let's just give them an hour of time to be with the family, have some dinner. And then we have some kids that are staying up till 1, 2, 3 in the morning to do homework. I don't
That's right.
think that's healthy. I think
It's not.
and I think so I do think we have to look at it. But to me, that's why what you're saying with the differentiated instruction, differentiated assignments is great. And I really believe giving them more days to complete assignment. If they want to wait to the last minute, that's up to them.
Right.
But
And some will.
yeah, and some will.
And
We
they'll-
did when we were in school.
Oh, I most certainly did. More than I want to admit.
Right.
Well, anyway, I think that was a very enlightening conversation, and I'm glad that we tackled some topics that where we didn't necessarily agree as much as perhaps your aunt would have accused us of agreeing. So I think we're moving in the right direction, and hopefully one day when we make it to 200 downloads, the people who have been with us so far will know that they were there at 100. It's almost like being at Shea Stadium in 1964 when the Beatles came in. They were there at the beginning, so this is a very important time for these listeners, don't you think?
Yeah, but I'm too young for that reference. I don't.
Are you too young to pick up on sarcasm?
uh, I'll say no to that.
Okay, good, good. So if you're looking to find us on the web, you can find us at stateofedpodcast.com. If you have any questions or you'd like to suggest a topic for Nick and I to discuss, you can do that at ask@stateofedpodcast.com. We'll also put links to some of the things that we discussed in this podcast on our website. You could also follow us on Twitter at SOE Podcast. And I think that about wraps up our episode.
All right. Well, have a good week, Mark, and I will talk to you soon.
Thank you very much. You as well.